What would you have your arbiter do?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Thanks, Chief. I owe you.
I wondered who the prophets would send to silence me. An arbiter. I'm flattered.
At this rate, we're never going to win this war.
After exhausting every other strategic option, my
You begin with big. They will be disappointed.
Chief, we have. None will be left behind when our great journey begins. That is the prophet's age-old promise. And it shall be
Report from the Bastard Truth. Let us.
Hello, and welcome to the Bastard Truth. My name is Brent, and today we'll review the best-known details of undetailed, yet infinitely complex time. What lay before you are questions you may never knew to ask, answers to the void of time, nameless gods, and resentful fathers. Who were the Precursors? Where did they come from, and where did they go? And what of the better-known Forerunners and their hierarchy and lost conquests? And ultimately, the most personal tale of ourselves within this universe, how humanity fared between such might, knowledge, and anger. Though there will be overlap within the stories of these three and an even fourth race of interstellar beings, we must retain a sequential arc through their narratives and histories in order to prevent all there is to be heard for each fallen empire. Though to refer to our first subject as an empire would be a grotesque understatement. The Precursors, an advanced race that preceded and were mythologized by the Forerunners, classifying them as transcendent beings, having the ability to travel among galaxies and accelerate the evolution of intelligent life. While the Precursors themselves had long since disappeared during the time of the Forerunners, evidence of their technological and architectural achievements remained scattered across not only the galaxy, but also outside of it, namely in the large Magellanic Cloud. The Forerunners knew few concrete details about the Precursors, and most of their supposed knowledge came from the mythology they had constructed around their creators. Their most central belief was that the mantle, the role of guardianship of the galaxy and of all life, was bestowed upon them by the Precursors. From a Forerunner perspective, the passing of the mantle secured the Precursors' legacy in the form of the Forerunners, continuing their work after they departed, much in the same way humanity was appointed to be the Forerunners' inheritors shortly before the activation of the Halo Array. According to Forerunner belief, the Precursors had peacefully passed away after they fulfilled their mission in creating the Forerunners. The Forerunners believed that the Precursors had shaped the Forerunners in their own image, and some even suggested that they may have done the same with humans. By the time of the Human-Forerunner Wars, prehistoric humans also claimed to be the sole inheritors of the mantle, something contemporary Forerunners considered heretical. The majority of this information was mythology, with a dubious historical basis providing a set of explanations for the innumerable mysteries surrounding the Precursors. The facts were very different from what the Forerunners had ultimately chosen to believe. Now, the geographic origin of the Precursors is unknown, though they are believed to have originated outside of the Milky Way galaxy. They were an incredibly advanced race of beings who explored many galaxies and seeded them with life over the course of many billions of years. As transcendent beings, they existed on an abstract level beyond that of conventionally sapient biological organisms. They were not tied to any particular physical form, assuming any shape as they saw fit. They would allow themselves to die away and be evolved anew over and over again, taking on numerous incarnations, both physical and immaterial. They believed through different stages of technological and cultural development countless times, being at times hyper-advanced and spacefaring, and at other times living primitively and remaining confined to their worlds. The Precursors based their existence around the philosophical concepts of the mantle, living time, and a metatechnological mechanism known as neural physics, which enabled them to manipulate the fabric of the universe. More on that later. Now, according to the philosophical aspect of neural physics, the universe itself is a living entity, though vastly different in nature and scale from organic beings. The Precursors' stewardship for all life involved the belief that all experience of biological organisms enriched the greater universal whole, something they had experienced firsthand through the constantly changing nature of their own existence. To contain this vast knowledge and experience, the Precursors created the domain, a transcendent quantum reservoir of information later accessed by the Forerunners. The Precursors were responsible for seeding the Milky Way with life, creating the galaxy's diverse composition of species. Now, over time, they would also judge whether a species was worthy of the mantle, their assumed role of guardianship of all life. The humanoid species native to the world of Jivalb, who would come to be known as the Forerunners, were next chosen for this task. This species was eventually judged to be unworthy of taking on the mantle, and the Precursors instead decided that the responsibility would fall on the shoulders of another of their creations, a collection of various subspecies referred to as humanity, hailing from the planet known as Irde Terrin. When the Precursors announced this decision to the Forerunners around 10 million BCE, the latter furiously retaliated against their creators and drove them to near extinction, first in the Milky Way and eventually in the satellite galaxy of Pathkathana. Only a small number managed to escape the Forerunners' campaign of extermination. According to the Precursors themselves, the Forerunners struck against their creators unprovoked, while certain Forerunners who learned the truth later on insisted the Precursors had planned to wipe out the Forerunners first. Thus far, our story has led us to what at face value is a very benevolent God, a race of beings so powerful yet entirely just in their right and decisions, unchallenged by any of their Adams or Eves. Their outlook on the galaxy of life they have spent billions of years to create seems utopian, wherein they have complete control and dictation over their creations. In most fiction, this results in one of two ways, either in the challenger's immediate descent from Eden, or the eventual but trailing success of this same challenger. What we have within the Halo lore is a bit of both. To this point, however, we have a parent who cannot understand why their forsaken child would be upset by their adult and rational decision, and a child who can only see that this parent's decision will lead to their emancipation and even destruction. The Precursors, however, have aided in their own demise, allowing the Forerunners the time and energy to grow the teeth that would not just bite, but eat the hand that feeds them, lashing out so incredibly that it leads to their extinction. A few Precursors escaped or were spared by the Forerunners. They either went into suspended animation or became molecular dust that was meant to eventually regenerate into their past forms. However, over millions of years the dust became defective, failing to reconstitute the Precursors and instead inducing madness and mutations in life forms that came in contact with it. This form would later be known as the Flood. Far from accepting failure and extinction, the Precursors viewed the Flood as a means to bring unity to the galaxy, as well as punish the Forerunners for their insolence. Vowing that none of their creations would rise against them again, the Precursors decided that all life would be deprived of free will and merged into one. In the end, the sum of the Precursors' creations would be a reflection of themselves and the suffering their creations caused them. Around 107,445 BCE, 10 million years after the Forerunners' genocide of the Precursors, humanity's interstellar empire came into contact with the Precursor powder, which would, over several centuries, bring forth the Flood. The Flood initially ravaged humanity's colonies until receding from the galaxy on its own accord, awaiting for a better moment to exact their final vengeance on the Forerunners. The Flood intentionally allowed some humans to go uninfected, leaving the implication of a possible cure that would misdirect efforts in its nexus, all while the truth of the humans' genetic attack on the Flood was lost until it was far too late. Around the same time, a human exploratory group led by Yprin Yprakushma discovered a small planetoid at the edge of the Milky Way. Hidden within it was a large stasis capsule containing an ancient being whom they later named the Primordial. They transported the capsule and its captive to the human capital world of Shroom Hakor and found a way to communicate with the being, which claimed to be the last Precursor. When human scientists questioned the imprisoned being as to the nature of the Flood, the Primordial's response horrified the humans so deeply that many of them committed suicide. Around 10,000 years later, the Isodidact interrogated the Primordial on Installation 7, receiving only vague responses as to the fate of the Precursors and their relationship with the Flood. Enraged, the Isodidact executes the being. The Primordial faced its end with calm satisfaction, stating that the Forerunner's defiance and indeed its own death through the artificial passing of 1 billion years within an accelerated chronological field would only add up to the total sweetness of life's struggles, while asserting its confidence that all life would still succumb to the Flood in the end. The Didact later discovered that the Gravemind retained the thoughts and memories of the Primordial, demonstrating that they were one and the same. However, not even the Gravemind could fully access or comprehend the wisdom the Precursors once had, flawed and fallen as it was. In the final hours of the Forerunners' war with the Flood, the Gravemind sent a group of imprinted humans, including Fortencho, Lord of Admirals, to deliver a message to the Librarian, who was stranded on Ear Tyrene. Fortencho revealed the truth to her about the Precursors, and that the domain was in fact the mythical Organon, which would be destroyed by the Halo Array's immediate firing. By withholding this information until the very end, when the Halo's activation could no longer be stopped, the Precursors ensured that the Forerunners would unwittingly destroy all records of their history and their cultural heritage, or kill their own soul, as phrased by the Librarian herself. This was the culmination of the Precursors' insidious plan of vengeance against the Forerunners, set in motion 10,000 years earlier with the revelation of the Flood. While the firing of the Halos seemingly quelled the Flood, the Precursors, through the Gravemind, had already accomplished what they intended, to punish the Forerunners for their defiance, not only directly via the Flood, but also allowing the Forerunners' own scheming and internecine feuding to gradually tear down the Forerunners' deepest held precepts and beliefs. By the time of the Halos firing, in addition to the near extinction of the Forerunner species, the Forerunners were forced to admit their many failures and give up the mantle, ensuring that they would not rise again despite their Pyrrhic victory. Now, we have our first characters, major named players, the first of which being pre-human. Yprin a key figure of the prehistoric spacefaring human empire. By the human Forerunner Wars, she held the rank of political and morale commander. Yprin and her science team discovered the ancient primordial 40 years before the last major conflict with the Forerunners. She recognized the entity's scientific potential and brought it to Sharum Hakor in a stasis capsule for study and questioning. According to Yprin, the information gained from the primordial saved billions of human lives in humanity's conflict with the Flood. However, her sworn opponent, Fortencho, the aforementioned Lord of Admirals, disputed this, claiming it was the humans themselves who came up with the solution to the Flood, and arguing that the primordial caused the downfall of humanity's civilization by gravely demoralizing them. Yprin was accredited with tracing humanity's origins to Ear Tyrene, a source of much dispute to the ancient humans, as humanity had lost most of the records during a technological dark age in their ancient past. Others, such as Fortencho, believed humanity's origins to be elsewhere, having witnessed ruins built by humans on many other worlds. Regardless of the opposition, Yprin discovery of humanity's true homeworld gained her the lofty status she held during the war with the Forerunners. In addition, it was her idea to analyze Forerunner technology and tactics gained from humanity's early conflicts with the Forerunners' technology that bought humanity decades of time against the numerically overwhelming and technologically superior Forerunner military. During the final battle of Sharum Hakor, she commanded a special force group of 7,000 warriors and 70 ships, tasked with defending the Sharum Hakor arena, the site of the Primordial's prison. The overwhelming final assault led by the Didact himself eventually broke through Sharum Hakor's defenses, and humanity's remaining forces were forced to surrender. Despite knowing her impending execution, she had hoped to warn the Forerunners about the Flood in order to ensure the safety for the rest of the galaxy. Fortencho, the Lord of Admirals, was a human senior naval officer who served during the human Forerunner Wars over 9,000 years before the Forerunner Flood War. His strategy and wartime prowess dueled against that of the Didact for 54 years. During humanity's conflict with the Flood and their simultaneous war with the Forerunners, he attempted in vain to convince the human government to draw the Flood back into the galaxy as a weapon against the Forerunners. Ultimately, he was overruled by Yprin and remained bitter about the decision, seeing the Flood could have been humanity's best hope of prolonging the war. As humanity fell back to their capital world Shroom Hakor, Forthencho commanded the forces protecting the planet, gaining an intimate understanding of the Didact's tactics and strategy in the process of countering his constant assaults over the course of the final battle. He ironically stated that no lover ever felt his intentions so fiercely. He later noted that despite his animosity toward Forerunners, he felt a deep respect for his main opponent. Eventually, he and the other surviving human forces were pushed back to the precursor ruin known as Citadel Shroom, where they made their final stand. As the final planetary defenses collapsed and their defeat became certain, the survivors stripped their uniforms in an effort to conceal their ranks from the Forerunners in the face of inevitable capture. This failed, as the Didact was able to locate him immediately from amongst thousands of human survivors that had been rounded up within the Citadel. Meeting his defeated opponent in person, the Didact addressed Forthencho as a fellow warrior, showing respect at his tenacity and reassuring him about the future, explaining that the librarian had laid plans for Forthencho and his human counterparts for thousands of years to come, and that their impending death would not mean the end of humankind. The Forerunners' old council believed that humanity possessed a cure to the flood, and the librarian intended to use this belief to preserve what she could of the human survivors. First analyzed both physically and mentally in the most thorough ways possible, Forthencho and the other humans on Shroom Hakor were scanned by composers, as seen in the event that left New Phoenix devoid of life in 2557, killing their physical selves but storing their patterns in virtual form. As mandated by the Old Council, the essences of Forthencho and the other humans processed by the composer were splintered into many copies, which were cycled through incessant virtual interrogation for thousands of years to come. The Council believed this would finally unlock humanity's supposed cure to the flood, thus making the Forerunners better prepared against the parasite when it reappeared. The Librarian, born First Light Weave's living song, was a highly influential Forerunner life-shaper and the head of the Life Workerate for 10,000 years. She was married to the Didact, the Promethean Supreme Commander of the Forerunner military. During the Forerunner Flood War, she led the conservation measure, which sought to index all species in the galaxy and transport them to the Ark and other conservation facilities before the flood could reach them or the Halo rings were fired. Frequently clashing with her husband over the morality of the array, the Librarian died at the end of the war when the rings were activated, willingly stranding herself on Earth within range of the Halo effect. She viewed the human species as having special significance and is responsible for grooming humanity to be the Forerunner's successors, eventually destined to reclaim the mantle. Now we have two characters of the same name, denoted and differentiated by a surname, both heroes in their own right, but one following a tragic path, both in service and marriage of her grace, the Librarian. The original Didact, born Shadow of Sundered Star, or Didact, is a Forerunner of Promethean who held an extremely high status in the Forerunner Society as protector of the Ecumene, head of the Warrior Servant Rate and supreme commander of the entire Forerunner military. He wholeheartedly believed in the mantle the Forerunners held to protect life, and fervently opposed the Halo array as a sin beyond measure. Originally thought to have been killed by the Master Builder Faber, the Didact effectively existed as two individuals during the final days of the Forerunner Flood War, his original self as well as his implanted consciousness within a young Forerunner known as Born Stellar Makes Eternal Lasting, his other incarnation to be known as the Iso-Didact. This Iso-Didact served until the final days of the Flood conflict, and was the single figure responsible for activating the Halo array under the authority of the Librarian, their eventual romance and final days detailed in the many terminals surrounding the Lesser Ark. To clarify further, a grave mind is a coagulation of flood forms with a greater intelligence encompassing all that is and can be known by all that succumb to its endless hunger. It takes on the voices it has silenced and uses them as its own guise when appropriate. Though there have been many grave minds throughout the millennia, it is believed that there can only ever be one hive, one mind, to which all flood forms are led on their never-ending conquest to incorporate all life into one primitive precursor existence. Their grotesque form and decaying ever-changing masses reappropriating based on environment and function. This is in stark contrast to the final form of the primordial, thought to be the first of the grave minds as well as the last of the precursors. Equally as massive in size, the mold encapsulating the being outlined a being approximately 15 meters tall and 11 meters wide. When first witnessed by the isodidact on Shroom Hakor, the creature was described as possessing an insectoid head, 4 arms, and 2 degenerate legs. A long, segmented tail attached to the base of the skull, tipped with a 2-meter-long barb. Each hand had 3 fingers and a central opposable thumb. The face has been likened to that of a Euripterid, or sea scorpion, a creature that the Precursors had allegedly seeded on a number of planets. Its head flattened with oval compound eyes and insect-like mouthparts. Later, aboard Installation 7, the creature was described as having a large number of legs which it held in a curled-up position similar to a spider. The creature's torso was described as grossly fat, and its skin was covered in a glassy, crystalline coating. A fine powder often fell from its body, flood spores, or the same powder responsible for the original flood outbreak, the instrument of Precursor will and revenge. After the break, we'll round out our introduction of the Promethean Menace and the Prehistoric Wars, and wrap up the show with the reveal of next week's episodic lesson. Halo news for the biggest week in entertainment. E3 presents us with a glimpse into the campaign of Halo 5 Guardians. It is confirmed that the Guardians referenced in the title are the Forerunner war constructs first mentioned in Halo Cryptum as the War Sphinx. Massive tools of physical and energetic destruction, it would appear as though the Master Chief himself is allowed aboard the Guardian, heralded by a Promethean officer introduced as Warden Eternal. The Covenant conservative extremist, Julum Dama, is seen confronted by Blue Team, seemingly afraid. The Forerunner equivalent of a human Harrier-class helitransport is showcased, here called a Phaeton. A crude bow-like plasma weapon is retrieved by Spartan Locke of Fireteam Osiris, functioning both as a short bow and a bouncing projectile thrower. Fireteam Osiris consists of Spartan Buck, former ODST and hero of the closing days of the Battle of New Mombasa, Spartan Vale, fluent in Sangheili and an acting liaison for post-war negotiations serving under ONI. Spartan Tanaka, bringing the heart to the team, shouldering the burden of a long life under threat from Covenant glassing, serving in the Corps as a method of ensuring that no one else suffer the same trials as the designated marksman of Fireteam Osiris. Osiris meets the might of the Prometheans during the siege of Sunayon, the last Covenant stronghold in the known galaxy. This would indicate that the post-war years not only have seen the diminishing of the Hirohane, but of the politically unrecognized Covenant sect. Also revealed is an addition to the Spartan 4 Infinity combat training named Warzone, wherein 2 12-man teams of Spartan 4s take off toe-to-toe against each other and alien adversaries with the goal of domination based off total kill count or the destruction of the opposing team's core. High-ranking Covenant and Promethean armsmen debut throughout the exercise as a means of thwarting the Spartan teams in their bout amongst themselves. Weapon and asset acquisition is based off session progression and combatant service record. Whether or not this exercise is held aboard the UNSC Infinity or on allocated UNSC lands is yet to be determined. A figure, appearing to be an apparition of the artificial intelligence Cortana, reveals to the Master Chief that the domain is once again open, questioning whether or not the Organon was destroyed during the Halo Galactic Extinction event or currently resides intact. In other news, Benjamin Giroir's search for truth comes to a close over intergalactic broadcast. His reveal as to the true intent of the Master Chief during the Ambassador Massacre is remanipulated into heroist propaganda supporting the actions of the Master Chief and denouncing the pro-human activists self-referred to as Sapien Sunrise. Giroir's current whereabouts are unknown at this time. This has been your Halo News Break, June 17th, 2015. Now back to the Bastard Truth.
Lord of Admirals, we are in position over the Forerunner planet.
Show me. Population numbering over 2 billion. Forerunner ships on alert and inbound.
Is it possible? Have we gotten ahead of it?
Flood infestation detected, my lord.
Damn it!
My lord, the infestation is in a remote locale. Perhaps if we warn the Forerunners?
If we warn them, we give the flood time to spread. You know we have no choice. Cleanse the planet.
Precursor technology was extremely advanced. That goes without saying. To the point that the Forerunners labeled it Tier 0. Precursors based their technology upon what Forerunners called neural physics, the concept that inanimate matter and thought are inextricably linked and that the universe itself is effectively a living entity. By drawing from the fundamental energies of the universe, the Precursors built exotic, virtually indestructible architecture, and traveled across interstellar distances using a superluminal transit mechanism based upon the same principle. The Halo Array, being neurological weapons, are one of the only ways to destroy or otherwise damage Precursor artifacts. This was first evidenced when Shuruma Core itself was used as the testbed for one of the Halos. The weapon's firing shattered every Precursor artifact on the planet. This also explains the lack of any Precursor ruins in modern society, as most, if not all, were destroyed when the Halo Array fired and sterilized the galaxy at the end of the Forerunner Flood War. Some Precursor artifacts were known to precede the Forerunners by hundreds of millions of years, and being impervious to conventional forms of damage, were durable enough to survive being cycled inside planets' crusts by plate tectonics. Precursor artifacts were often encountered by miners, who obtained and recorded them, but rarely held any particular interest in them. The most coveted Precursor artifact among the Forerunners was known as the Organon, which was allegedly capable of activating all other Precursor artifacts. In truth, the Organon was synonymous with the Domain. The Precursors also left behind a small number of mysterious deep space artifacts known as anchors, large anomalous masses which released no radiation. They were generally regarded as unstable and dangerous. The Forerunners had recorded strange phenomena near these masses, including ships vanishing and surviving crews suffering severe mental trauma, requiring extensive protogeometric therapy to restore their mind's neural topology to its normal state. Precursor construction was gray-silver in color, much like that favored by the Forerunners. When witnessed in a collapsed state on Shuruma Core, the construction material had shattered along crystalline planes. Among the most impressive of the Precursor structures were the enormous orbital arcs and star roads, unbending filaments which were used to connect entire worlds and star systems. These structures were once plentiful in the galaxy, forming graceful curves among many star systems. They appear to be mostly dormant and unchanging, apart from the automatic adjustments based on changes in planetary orbits. Other types of Precursor constructs included structures referred to as planetary fortresses and citadels. Toward the end of the Forerunner Flood War, the Flood began to reactivate and employ these formerly inert Precursor artifacts against the Forerunners, the Flood able to control them due to its Precursor origins. These artifacts, mainly star roads, were what eventually turned the war into the Flood's favor, as they were capable of effortlessly either outright physically tearing apart Forerunner fleets or remotely deactivating their weapons on Cius, Forerunner artificial sapience, and shields, rendering them helpless against the Flood. The Precursors' rekindled might extended beyond the mastery of technological artifacts. After reaching the key mind stage, Flood compound minds gained the ability to tap into neural physics, and along with it the Precursors' reality mutation capabilities. When moving across the galaxy, Flood-controlled Precursor constructs would convert spacetime itself to be unsuitable for Forerunner subspace drives, due to the differences between the subspace travel used by the Forerunners and Precursors' neural physics-based transit. Ships using this form of superluminal travel would momentarily radiate multiversal residues, accrued during the journey upon returning to normal space. The Forerunners suspected that the Precursors possessed unknown means of correcting causality other than the reconciliation Forerunner ships were subject to. The widespread use of neural physic transit affected the galactic-scale magnetic fields that marked the borders of the Ecumenes Themas. The effects of the Precursors' manipulation of space could even be felt by individual beings. Toward the end of the Forerunner Flood War, Forerunners began to perceive starlight as possessing a hostile, repelling quality. Perhaps the Precursors' most extraordinary creation was what the Forerunners knew as the Domain, a vast reserve containing the totality of Precursors' accumulated knowledge and experience, amounting to 100 billion years, with most of the information gathered originating from the beginning of the universe, if not earlier. This reserve of knowledge was contained in Precursor constructs in the Milky Way galaxy and projected a massive field through which records could be accessed anywhere regardless of locality. The Domain itself was also a conscious entity. Although this only became apparent near the end of the Forerunner Flood War, the Domain would later be discovered and appropriated by the Forerunners as a store of their own records and knowledge, becoming a principal element of their culture. Despite this, the domain remained highly esoteric to the Forerunners. Not even its origin and true nature were known. With the activation of the Halo Array and the galaxy-wide unraveling of precursor neural physics, the domain and all knowledge contained therein was lost, along with all precursor architecture. Or so we are led to believe. In the next lesson of the Bastard Truth, we will dive deeper into what has been revealed today surrounding the Forerunners, their methods in ending galactic conflicts with both humanity and the Flood alike, their resolve and exit of this great play for power. If you would like to have your voice heard on the series, please leave any and all critical comments in the inbox of bastardtruth@gmail.com, wherein I will read your suggestions for this program and take note of any factual inconsistencies you may find in your listening. The domain hears all. Till next time, Spartan.